Good evening. I'm Gilbert Vicario, Seelig Family Chief Curator here at Phoenix Art Museum. Welcome to the 13th Annual Eric Fischl Lecture Series. This year's guest artist is Njideka Akunyili Crosby. I just want to give a special thanks to our friends at Phoenix College, Deb Spotts, Development Director, and Dale Doubleday, Department Chair, Fine Arts and Performing Arts, for being such great partners on this event. And with that, I want to introduce Dale Doubleday.
This is going to be my last year representing Phoenix College at this event. And I'm hoping to pass it to art faculty Jay Harden, who's our painting and drawing instructor. Jay, are you in here, the audience? So, Jay, I just want to pass these to you. You want to come down? You have some pretty fancy shoes to fill there, guy. Please. A lot of people have been asking about the history of this event and the partnership between Phoenix College and the Art Museum. So I've been asked to give an explanation, a background about it, because a lot of people that are involved are newer and they don't go back as long as we have, which is like over 13 years now. Contemporary figurative realist painter Eric Fischl attended Phoenix College in the late 1960s after moving to the Phoenix area with his family from New York. While at PC, Eric studied under contemporary landscape painter Merrill Mahaffey, who is here this evening, and who Fischl credits with opening his mind to a new way of thinking. Eric told me that he feels a sense of obligation to facilitate conversations on the arts and to give back to the place where he first felt that he could be and was allowed to be an artist. Fischl says that he was inspired to help Phoenix College become a center for the arts in downtown Phoenix. Eric is motivated to validate young artists to pursue their dreams, and in 2005, a partnership between Phoenix College and Eric Fischl was established. A Best in Show program was created alongside the annual Student Art Awards and exhibit. The Fischl partnership developed and grew organically over many years, but the beginnings of the formal Fischl program were emerging. The program consisted of two components for the first few years: a lecture on the differing perspectives among art professionals, students, educators, and artist enthusiasts, and the Vanguard Awards, providing a $2,500 cash prize to the top 2 art students. Until 2008, the lecture and all components of the Fischl program were hosted at the Phoenix College campus. In 2007, guest artist Ralph Gibson, an internationally known photographer, was highly anticipated, and there was standing room only in the lecture in PC's Bullpit Auditorium. At this point, local artists, art collectors, and enthusiasts began to take notice at what was happening at Phoenix College. The president of the Contemporary Forum at the Phoenix Art Museum reached out to Eric and asked if a partnership could be established that would showcase the student art while allowing the Fischl Lecture to grow. In 2008, the lecture was hosted for the first time here at the Phoenix Art Museum, and student work was displayed in the Great Hall. offering what Eric purported to be an exceptional opportunity for Phoenix College students. Each year, Fischl returns to Phoenix College to host a series of events. The series officially kicks off in the morning with Eric and the guest artist evaluating the work submitted for the annual student art competition. The art competition motivates students to submit their best work for consideration for a number of awards, including the coveted Vanguard Awards, highlighting the best in show from among the submitted work. Eric and guest artist Njideka selected this year's Vanguard Award winners, and Eric will present them to you shortly. This afternoon, they hosted student art portfolio critiques, providing valuable feedback and insight to PC art students. It was 3.5 hours, folks. We had to drag her out of there because the students wouldn't leave her alone, and she wouldn't stop. She was just absolutely wonderful. Yeah, let's give her a hand for that. The student art competition winner's artwork was then transported here so that we may enjoy it following the lecture. Please check your programs to see the student award winner names and look at their art on your way out in the Great Hall, because it's just, we're so proud of them. We hope you'll take some time following the lecture. I just said that to few. I'd like to thank the art faculty that was so instrumental in not only getting their students to submit their work for the portfolio review, but encouraging their students to go beyond their expectations when they produce their artwork. And I'd like to thank Jay Harden and Jen LaFoon and Tiffany Bailey and Rudy Navarro for helping with everything the last couple weeks to get things ready, and all the adjuncts of Phoenix College. Please give them a hand. Also like to say that we have a special gift for Eric and for Njideka, because they were both interested in purchasing artwork from students at the college today. And we would like to purchase them. The college is going to purchase them and present them to you as a thank you for all the time that you put into today's festivities and everything that you're doing. The annual Eric Fischl Series culminates with tonight's presentation of the Vanguard Awards and the guest lecture. The Eric Fischl program is not only having an impact on student lives, but also on the quality of art education being offered at Phoenix College, and on the art community by shaping the future of art in Phoenix and beyond. We would like to thank our sponsors, Varatech Solutions, D.L. Withers Foundation, Lisa Setti Gallery, Nancy Myers, Kim Williamson, and Adam Singer. The Fischl program celebrates the incredible work being produced right now in the art world, and it helps shape the next generation of great American artists. This program is brought to Phoenix College students, you, and to the community free of charge, thanks to our sponsors and Eric and the guest artist's generosity. Our goal is to endow the Fischl programs in perpetuity. If you would like to support the Fischl program, there is information about giving on a table outside the auditorium. Thank you for supporting the arts at Phoenix College and in Phoenix. Now please join me in welcoming Eric Fischl.
Thank you, Dale. And before I let her actually go sit down, I just want to say she's been a part of this since the beginning. And more than a part, she's been the anchor for it. She's done an extraordinary job of continuing to develop it program-wise, to develop it in terms of sort of focusing the student body and the faculty on the sort of the dream of the program. And we're going to miss her terribly. I personally am going to miss her even more. I'm confident the program will go on. We're in good hands, but she brought something to it that really helped me to define the ambition for it. And so I'm deeply saddened and excited for her to go into her new life. And I have something for you. It's literally the least I could do. Lovely. And we're very excited for the awardees tonight. We had a great experience. I did nothing in terms of choosing the work. The Njideka went in and she went through it over and over and over again, and really made all the decisions. And it was exciting to watch her and listen to her talk about why, and it was instructive to me. I have to say that the quality of the work was very high. Each year it's progressively so, and that's rewarding for me as well. So tonight I'd like to introduce our Vanguard winners and have them come down one at a time and receive their award. The first is awarded to Amy Sansbury Manning.
Thank you.
We got to get, hold on. Yeah, there we go. You got it? Yeah, that's definitely over here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The work that Amy did is a ceramic piece that's out in the main gallery. That is beautifully executed, totally mysterious. It's almost like a fossil. It's like a drawing. It's an extraordinary piece, and I've never seen anything like it. So I encourage you all to check that out. Our second award goes to Mackenzie Heineman. We got to get some crazy glue here. Mackenzie is a painting that's out in the main gallery as well. Small, intimate abstraction that is truly poetic, and sort of has an evocation of landscape, and at the same time is so ephemeral that it's breathtaking to see. So I encourage that as well. The other award, now this is something, we got to actually stop this, because it's supposed to be 2 awards. I'm kind of going broke here. This is like the second year in a row. It's all deserved. I wish there was 100 awards, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, this one goes to Jean-Paul. I'm calling him Jean. I don't know if it's French or not, but Jean-Paul Kellogg.
Jean-Paul has a black and white photograph, a portrait, headshot, mostly black silhouette, an extraordinary perception of shape and transition from flatness into definition. That it's eloquent, and I suggest you check that out as well. Now I'd like to introduce our main reason for being here. It's 13 years we've had an incredible run, and we've had incredible guests, huge talent, etc. What we haven't had before is hitting the mark perfectly where somebody's career is ascendant at the same time that we recognize her brilliance. And Njideka is an extraordinary artist, as you're going to learn looking at her work and listening to her. But it just gives me great pleasure to know that she was generous enough to come here at a time when she could have gone anywhere. And she could have even stayed home with her 4-month-old baby, right? Even though she tells me she's kind of happy to get away. However, it's a huge excitement for me. I'm a big fan of her work. I saw her a painting of hers for the first time maybe 5 years ago or something, and was just dumbstruck standing in front of it, and it's just that admiration has grown and grown. So I'd like to bring up to the stage Njideka. I gotta say one. I actually forgot the most important thing, which is that she began her art education at a community college.
Hi. So let me set up a little bit. I wanted to okay, good. Just orienting myself. I wanted to thank you all for coming. It's really an honor to be here. I'd like to thank Phoenix College, the Phoenix Art Museum, the Contemporary Forum, the Fischl Program supporters, and the Fischl Program sponsors. I came into Phoenix yesterday afternoon, and I've been having a wonderful time. Everybody has been incredibly generous with their time and made sure I've had a good time, and it really has been a pleasure. I wanted to thank the students for giving me the opportunity to talk about their works with them this afternoon. It's something I really enjoy doing as an artist. Not just because I enjoy being hard on people, but it's also something that it makes me excited. Right now, I'm very excited to get back to LA and go into my studio and work. Just looking at other people, thinking about their work, because as you're thinking and talking about someone's work, you're also kind of thinking about your own work at the same time. And I wanted to say I was very honored to be the person who had to pick the Vanguard Awards. And the work was really strong. And it was hard to stay with 2. Even 3 was too little, but you just have to do it. And I just wanted to say it takes a lot to put yourself out there by submitting works as an artist, and it's that kind of courage that'll see you through all the ups and downs of being an artist and doing art. So I thank everybody who submitted work for consideration for that award. It really was a pleasure to have the opportunity to look at it. Okay, so the format of the lecture, it takes me a little while before I get into showing images of my own work. I tried to retool this and present it another way, but I like doing it this way. So I'm going to start off by showing what seems like a random series of images, and I'll talk through them as I show them, but it's going to range from photos I have up in my studio. Can you all hear me well, or am I the only one hearing this weird, like? No, it's good. Okay. Talking of photos I have up in my studio, photos that have influenced my work. Sorry, I want to see if this has a timer. I can talk a lot, so if I don't, if I don't have a clear timer in front of me, you'll be here at 9 o'clock, just saying, could this girl please shut up? Okay, I can see that. I always need like someone flashing a clock at the back. Okay, so see, there it goes. It's happening already. So photos that have influenced me, photos I have up in my studio, photos that you find in my work, photos that I find relevant to my practice. I have a few images of artists that have influenced me, not too much, because that would be like a whole other lecture on its own. I have maybe 3 or 4 artists I have selected. And then after all that, I will come back to my work. And hopefully by the time we get to the work, it makes a little bit more sense and I can move through those faster. So a little bit about me. I was born in Nigeria in the early 80s, and I lived there up until I was 17 when I came to the United States for school. And Nigeria is a very fascinating country because it was a British colony up until 1960, and then we gained our independence. And also something that started happening in the country in my formative years when I was in my early teens. So we're talking the 90s in Nigeria, was you begin to see a lot of consumption of American programming in the country. So you begin to have this space that has its own traditions going on, but then the British presence from when we were a British colony and American pop culture influence from all the media we were consuming to kind of yield this really interesting space. So this is a very old Life magazine picture of a very popular Nigerian family. They are Demola Adetokunbos, and that's the father who was the traditional ruler of a part of Abeokuta, which is in the southwest of Nigeria, and that's his son. So even with this generation change, you can see the change from this generation to that generation, which coincides with like my parents' generation. A lot of them went to the UK for school. A lot of them were the first to leave the villages and go to the big cities for jobs and education and things like that. So I think of things like that in my work, the change in generations, and then going from the father's generation to my generation. So this is a photograph of me with my sister, where in my generation, but you know, there's this generation, my father's generation, where there was this move away from things that were very Nigerian, and then there's my generation that's kind of moving back to tradition, because you know, things always happen in swings or cycles. But the fascinating thing about my generation is that we're moving back to tradition, you know, quote unquote tradition, and I'll get to that later. But if you're really thinking of tradition that was abandoned by my parents' generation, if you go back to it decades later, it's not going to just be there waiting for you to pick it up. Lots of things have been lost, have vanished, can be recovered. So what you're really beginning to see people do is pick up things that are left and cobbling it with other things. So even what we call tradition really is this new transcultural thing. So that's one of the things I think about in my work, and also thinking about how a number of Africans and Nigerians specifically of my generation have multiple places they call home and don't really belong to any single geography. So I think of people living in a liminal space and what it means to have a hybrid identity. I use a lot of pop culture images in my work. And with the pop culture images, I'm really trying to use these pictures to put my finger on the energy of a place and really trying to use them to map how other cultures have influenced the place where I grew up. So using pop culture images this is probably from the 70s, Prince Nikombwaga, to a pop culture image from today, and this is Two-Face Idibia. And I love pictures like this. This is a picture you'll see a lot in my work because this is a very recent picture. You can definitely see this artist borrowing from the tropes we know musicians here use, but nobody will see this picture and think it's in the United States of America. So those are the kind of pictures I like, where you can see that they are mimicking, I'm not meant to move out from the light. I mean, I can, but I should. Where they are mimicking something else, either mimicking something from the UK or mimicking something from the USA, but in that mimicry. And Homi Bhabha talks about this, how hybridity actually comes from a space of mimicry. Because the thing is that mimicry is never perfect, you know, he kind of is wearing this weird 70s suit. And it's in that space where mimicry is not perfect, you know, it's like, it's almost but not quite, and it's in that space that hybridity happens. So I look for pictures that I feel are right on that space. This is something that also for me speaks to this mimicry, this idea of a hybrid third space. Let me take a break. And Homi Bhabha, the same person who said that hybridity comes out of mimicry, also coined this term third space, which is the space that comes about when different cultures or different disparate things overlap. And that new space where they overlap is the third space, because it's not just space one plus space two to give this third space. The third space really becomes its own thing. And it's a space that really is exciting because it's not a static thing, because there's this appropriation and negation is a constant thing that is always moving and doesn't stay in one place. And Nigeria is such a space, not just from having over 200 tribes within it, but also being a space where the British used to be there, but now you also have American culture that has been very dominant in the past few decades, and all those things have mixed together to give rise to this whole new thing that changes. Every time I go back home, I can tell that this country that is trying to forge a sense of self has shifted just a little bit, and I'm constantly chasing after it and trying to do that in my work, to make work that talks about the third space, but also situates the viewer in that space. You know, the space where various cultures overlap. Oh, I didn't even talk about this picture. I mean, I guess this picture that was meant to be a pointer. This is not a photograph I took, but it's a photograph I really like a lot because it really has its finger on what I'm interested in. So this was taken in Abuja, which is the capital of Nigeria. And it's just people out and about at an event, but I love when I start breaking things down. So for instance, if somebody looks at these, they'll say, these two guys, actually these three guys, this guy here, and this guy here, are wearing traditional outfits. But then, of course, you begin to see, like, yes, they're wearing traditional outfits, but a traditional outfit has vestiges from when we used to be a British colony. The top hat has been co-opted and has become part of tradition. But even if you look at the suits they're wearing, which is like a suit from the south, Niger Delta, which is really south of the country, it's a traditional suit that has been influenced by a British suit, so like British tails. So you do see this constant, like looking at people who are looking back at you. It's like this very fascinating back and forth that I'm interested in. This is a photograph from that same event. So now I switch a little bit. This is a photographer from Mali called Malik Sidibe. And I just need to rest. Yeah, so Malik Sidibe is, Malik Sidibe, I think most people know him for, is taking photographs of people wearing patterned fabrics in front of patterned backgrounds, and I'll get to those fabrics later on. But what I really love, and I'll show one later, are his social pictures. He'll do things like go to parties and take pictures of people just hanging out, dancing, playing games. And every time I look at them, I always feel like I get the feeling of Mali in the 70s, right after they became independent. And there's always this hopefulness I get from his photographs. So I do look at him for inspiration of how can you capture the sense of a place in a work. But also looking at this photograph and some of his studio photos, you do get that sense of a country that has a desire to present itself, or people in the work having a desire to present themselves as glamorous, as cosmopolitan, and as connected to a global community. And cosmopolitanism plays a big role in my work, and for me, what it means to be a cosmopolitan African woman. And I'll talk about that, I hope, as I go on. And so this is another photograph by Malik Sidibe of a social setting. This is another photographer, and this person is Nancy Kelelo Veleko, and she takes a lot of photos in Johannesburg. And the reason why I like her is because I feel with her pictures, I get this sense of cosmopolitan culture across the continent. I have this sense of specificity of, like she really is capturing what the urban fashion language or the urban feel of South Africa is. And this goes to kind of what I was talking about with the photograph of the musician on the yellow car. How if you break this picture apart, there's nothing in it that is not familiar to us. You know, these are hats, these are sunglasses, jackets, trousers, shoes. So piece by piece, it all makes sense, but something about the way they have been combined makes me feel that, you know, that's not Brooklyn. I might not feel like I know where it is, but, you know, there's also going to be someone else who sees it and immediately thinks, oh, I know where that is. I know this look. I know this experience. So those are things that are important to me, just specificity. What are those things that signal? What are those things that are signifiers of place, of time, of what continent you're on, or what part of the globe you reside in, or what socioeconomic class you come from. And if I'm able to really begin to name those things, I can play with them for when I want to create characters that defy any kind of box. This is from a book I like. This is Daniel Tamagni's Gentlemen of Bakongo. Is anyone here a Solange fan? I don't know if anyone has seen her Losing You album. Yeah, so remember, I don't know if you remember all those fashionable people she's dancing with and they're posing. It's based off of photographs from this book of the men in Bakongo who do this over-the-top dressing where they are imitating cultures from Europe. So you see men dress in Scottish attire or in suits and things like that with pipes, with top hats. And this is one of those really fascinating spaces where these men in Bakongo, now I'm going off topic, but it's okay. But you know, where these men in Bakongo are looking to Europe in how they're dressing, but of course they've created it's a whole new culture that is specific to them just because of the way they do it and the way they mix things and the poses and the attitude. So even though they're borrowing it from somewhere else, they really have owned it. And the like extra exciting part of this story for me is that Paul Smith, a British designer who wrote the intro to this book, the fashion show he did after this book came out was based off of the Gentlemen of Bakongo. So it's just like this, it's like they're looking at you and then you're looking back at them, looking at you. It's fascinating. Just thinking of mimicry as subversive. Another break. Okay, so this is an album cover. So this is a photograph. So that's a photograph of an artist I like, but also something I'm fascinated by. And this is a photograph of an album cover that I use within my work a lot. So when we get to my work, what you'll see is that I use a lot of photographs within the bigger image. So I'm going to touch up on some of those. The guy on top of the yellow car is one of the photographs I use a lot. This is another one. I have a few photos I call my Where's Waldo pictures. You'll find them in almost every work I have, even though I'll change other things up. So with this work, I'm going back to someone like Mary Louise Pratt, who talks about contact zone, this space where things collide and grapple with each other. And I like a photo like this because it's a visual proof of a contact zone, at least for me. So like this is a Nigerian musician who is obviously channeling Michael Jackson, who was huge in Nigeria, and of course that ties into American pop culture, influencing a lot of things in Nigeria. Because what happened is we became independent in 1960, and by the late 60s into the early 70s, oil was discovered and oil money started coming into the country. So from the 70s, or like late 70s, early 80s onwards, the country had the money to purchase programming from the United States. So we began to import a lot of programs. So you have the country shift from looking at UK or having UK as the pace setter for culture and style to move into the United States of America as like a cultural, I'm blanking out, like cultural pace setter, let's say. So you begin to see things like Michael Jackson coming into the culture a lot. This is another photograph I use in my work fairly often. This is a Nigerian musician called Genevieve, she's a Nigerian actress called Genevieve. And lots of people, when they see this, are always surprised to know that, one, it's a photograph that was taken in Nigerian of a Nigerian, and two, that it's a contemporary photograph because it looks like it's from a 1970s blaxploitation movie. But the reason why it looks like that is because we did consume that, and it has become interwoven into our culture. And I remember like a year ago, I was talking with Thelma Golden, and she had just come back from Nigeria because her husband is from there, and she was talking about how fascinating TV was. And she said, like, I feel like I understand your work a little bit more now because you turn on TV and there are things like Cosby Show and shows from the 80s and early 90s, and they're still on rerun there a lot. And so something like this totally makes sense. This is a picture that, one, shows what I'm talking about, but it's also something I use in my work. So it's not something as simple as our lawyers historically have and still do dress like this, just one of the vestiges of us being a former British colony. So this is a photograph that goes a little bit about, that touches up on, why did I put that in there? So with this, I guess in my work, I try to create these characters that tell a story. And it's like if I'm working on a character, each thing the character has on, from the shoes to the clothes to the hair, is filling out the story I want to tell. So I really, this goes back to specificity, I really try to put in a lot of thought into every piece of the puzzle. So I think of hair a lot as a signifier of place, but it can also be a signifier of time, because sometimes the hairstyles from, say, my grandmother's generation, or hairstyles from like the 50s and 40s, will not be the same as the hairstyles from the 80s when I was growing up there, even though the technique might be the same. So really thinking of how things can specify place, but also time. So for instance, these are photographs by a Nigerian photographer called J.D. Okayo-Jekere. And even though let me see if I can point out one thing. But for like this hairstyle and this hairstyle are done the same way. It's called threading. So even though that's threaded and a lot of these are threaded, they don't really speak to the same time, because what you begin to see is that even within traditional hairstyles like this, the hairstyles begin to reflect a modernizing Nigeria. So they have forms and names that reflect what's happening in the country. So you have things like flyover, roundabout. You have things like Eco Bridge, and so this is a period when Lagos is really modernizing and lots of buildings are going up. You see things that speak to skyscrapers or high rises. So even the tradition begins to tell a story. So those are like the kind of things I like to dig into when I'm doing my research. This is a picture I use in my work, but also a designer who I feel connected to in terms of what she's doing. This is Lisa Folawiyo, whose label used to be called Jewel by Lisa. And this is her Spring-Summer 2012 collection, and it was called Vintage Love. And what she's doing is that she's making these outfits where she's looking at traditional Nigerian silhouettes, but making them very contemporary or cosmopolitan. So the top of this shirt that the girl is wearing is the silhouette of a shirt that would have been worn by a man from northern Nigeria, but it's been appropriated and turned into something different. And of course, even the fabric has its own history, which I'll touch up on in a little bit. Do I get a heads up when I'm close to time? Maybe 30 minutes heads up? This is another Nigerian actress, Omotola, who is wearing what will be considered traditional outfit, but of course you begin to see that the silhouette and the patterning actually speaks to life outside Nigeria. The patterning is very British, and British of a certain time period. And the fabric she's wearing and the fabric that outfit is made from, and a lot of the outfits I use in my work and you've seen so far, are made with Vlisco. And I'm going to maybe kind of go off route a little bit to talk about Vlisco because it's really fascinating. So this is the same actress, Omotola, wearing this outfit, which I do own. My sister owned it, and I took it from her. Because I had the picture, I had looked at it, I was fascinated by it, and then I found out she had it, so I was like, there's no way I'm not taking this outfit from you. But I use a lot of fashion images because I feel fashion is such a good place to observe this third space phenomenon I'm interested in. So to break this down a little bit, she's wearing something from a designer that was made within the last few years, but the silhouette is referencing that, which is called Iram Buba, which is a traditional outfit of Yoruba people. And it's made using a pattern. This corkscrew pattern is one of the iconic patterns from this fabric printing mega house called Vlisco. So what Alter Ego is doing is that they took a Vlisco pattern, which traditionally would have been printed on cotton, and they printed it on this silk polyester blend, and they're using it to make this outfit that looks like Iran buba, but it's actually a skirt and a blouse that is designed in such a way that looks as if you've tied your buba like they did. So it's just this really fascinating thing. And so this kind of brings me to Vlisco and my interest in Vlisco and eventually portrait fabrics. Vlisco is a fabric printing house that was started in 1846. And Vlisco is in Holland. It's a Dutch company. So a lot of the fabrics, I mean, at this point, people just call it African fabric because we truly have co-opted it. But even though it's called African fabric, it really started in Holland. Vlisco was the main house that started it, and Hollandis, which is Vlisco's product, is still printed in Holland till today and shipped to the continent. They have some houses in Ghana called Woodin and some things here and there, but the like pinnacle or the creme de la creme of fabric production is this, and it's still being made out of the country. So a little bit of a history on this, which might explain why it resonates with me and why I'm fascinated by it. So Vlisco started off because there was a demand for fabric, especially coming out of, I think for them it was in Indonesia, where they were doing hand batik printing. And Vlisco wanted to dip into that market, but they wanted something that was faster than hand batik printing, so they started large-scale mechanical prints, fabric printing. And they tried to sell it to Indonesia and other Eastern countries, but it didn't do well there at all. It never caught on. And the reason why it didn't catch on was because the hand had been taken out of it. So there's this huge roller printing mechanisms and shops that have been set up. There's this product that is being produced, but they don't have a market for it. So they started trying to find a new market. And in early 1900s, they started, probably actually late 1800s, they started shipping them to the various countries on the African continent. And as early as 1920s, it really had caught on all over the continent. It really just took really fast, and people loved it and embraced it. Funny enough, loved it for the same reason why it did not do well in the other markets, which is that people loved that it spoke to a global, people loved the association that came with owning this fabric because it was mechanically produced and it spoke to industry and a globalizing, modernizing world. And this, going back to this wish to be associated with contemporary trends and fashion. So this is a picture of a Vlisco stall. This is a Vlisco ad, which of course reminds me of Michelin Thomas, Seydou Keita, Malik Sidibe. There are all these multiple areas of overlap happening simultaneously, but also reclining nudes, paintings of Venuses. And so that brings me to portrait fabric. So I've always been interested in Vlisco, and I don't use it in my work. And I might talk about why I don't use it later on, or I might not. But when I do my transfers in the work, I'm trying to evoke those fabrics. So it's almost like I want to make you think of those fabrics without painting those fabrics directly or without putting them on my work directly. But something I started doing over a year ago was I started, after years of resisting and fighting it, I started putting collaging fabric on my work, and what I've been collaging on my work are these portrait fabrics. And the reason why I like them is that they really occupy the same space I'm interested. I just keep circling around these same things, which is where something has been co-opted and turned into something new. So if you think of the guys with the top hat and the traditional suits. So thinking of how various countries on the continent have taken this way of mass printing fabric with roller machines, and they've added something little to it, which is putting portraits in it. And in just doing that one little thing, they've turned this whole thing on its head and claimed it, or like had full ownership over it. Which is like in putting these photographs in these prints that have simple repeat patterns, something really new and transcultural has been created that is unique to the continent, that is not coming to us from somewhere else anymore. The only times I've seen portrait fabrics outside an African country was when I was in Harlem. I saw a number of them on Harlem 125th, and I'll always, battery is low, just a heads up. I'll always stop and ask the person how they got it, because I was fascinated by this. The first person I asked had them shipped from Kenya. The second person and they were all of President Obama at that time. And the second person I asked had it printed here, but they had seen it when they were in an African country. So it really is unique to the continent, and you do this for various reasons. So these are actually all portrait fabrics from my family. This is from when my brother got married. This is from when my mother ran for Senate, and this was another pattern from when she ran for Senate. And what you do is, this is not ours, this is from the governor of my state in the East. So when you make these fabrics, you give it to people, and then people make outfits out of it, and it just becomes part of your wardrobe. You wear it. I could be wearing a portrait fabric right now. You wear it anyhow you like. And that's a picture of my sister wearing the fabric with my mom on it. So this was from 2 years ago. Just to give you an idea of how these would be worn. Is there a power plug? I'll keep talking, by the way. I hope I didn't kick it or something. Okay. This picture, I took this picture on my last trip home. But it's also like what she's wearing would be called traditional attire. And that's one of the sub-themes in my work, is just this question of, at this point in Nigeria, what is tradition? Because this is a fabric that we inherited from the Dutch, but we've changed it a little bit, and she's wearing this thing that is sewn in a style that is not really Nigerian. And so, it's like this weird, really complex space that I'm interested in, because I have lived it and experienced it. So, good. Yeah, because of course, in addition to being a Nigerian who lives here now and is grappling with two ideas of home, I also grew up in a very small town, just small, everybody knew everyone. I spent my weekends and summers in the village with my grandmother, never left this little place I was from until I was 13. And it's like where I was from, everybody spoke Igbo, which is my language and my tribe. It was very homogenous, and when I was 13, I went to boarding school in Lagos, which is one of the biggest metropolis in West Africa, just a sprawling, huge cosmopolitan city. And so in the work, I'm also thinking of the space, the in-between space I've inhabited from being this small town person who went to a big city, and then, of course, leaving Nigeria and coming to the United States. and then marrying my husband, who is a white American, and something else in the work that maybe might not be so easy to unearth is that we were not very wealthy when I was young. We were actually fairly lower middle class, maybe even poor. But by the time I was in high school, towards the end of my high school, through a really weird series of events, my mother got a job as the head of the Nigerian Food and Drug Agency. So we really went from there to this whole other socioeconomic sphere of Nigeria. So I do talk a little bit of that weird straddling of those two spaces. Oops. I'm almost at my work. And of course, this is another picture I put up thinking of that question of what is tradition at this point, because so many things are invented. And I talked about this earlier, but it's like if so many things were abandoned by our parents and we're going back to pick them up, we really are just making this new mismatched thing. But it is fascinating, and I am fascinated by it. So you'll see me use a lot of photographs in the work of traditional weddings in Nigeria, at least the parts of Nigeria I'm from. You do two weddings. You do your traditional wedding and your white wedding, which happens in church. So this is my brother of this portrait fabric. So that's my brother at his traditional wedding. But so, I mean, little things I can point out where we're all wearing these scarves that are tied in a way that is from Eastern Nigeria, but the culture of people matching Asoebi is from the West, from Yoruba people are the ones who started it. So in these little things like that, where my brother is wearing the suit that is from the Niger Delta, which is from the South. And so you really can begin to look at this traditional wedding, and it breaks down into multiple different tribes that have come together to yield this. And of course, we're all wearing outfits that are done in very Western styles. And so that's why I use a lot of photographs like this within the work. Now we get to painting. So let me drink some water. I'm halfway through. Is that good? Okay, so this is not my work. I wish it were. This is a painting by Manet. And sometimes I make work that directly quotes something else. So I've given you some history, some of my history in terms of my life and where I grew up and all that, but another part of my history has to do with my education. So I moved to the United States. After high school in Nigeria, I did a year at the Community College of Philadelphia, which is where I took my first painting class, first time I used oil and all that. And then I went to Swathmore for 4 years. Then I moved to Nigeria for 1 year, and I finished Swathmore as a double major in art and biology. And then I went to Nigeria, worked for a year, came back to the United States of America, and I went to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. And I was there for 4 years. So it really was at the Pennsylvania Academy that I had my longest art training. And you're painting and drawing from life and the figure from morning till night, Monday to Friday. And it's the way painting and drawing and everything is taught at the Pennsylvania Academy is really a history that has been passed down for hundreds of years. Probably how they were teaching painting and drawing in the French Academy from 1600s. So you're working from the cast, you're working from still life, you're working from nude models. So for me, this is the tradition I inherited. This is the way of working that has come to me. So just thinking of all the things I've shown, the question or the challenge for me in the studio is this: how do I take this thing that is not mine, that I've inherited, and co-opt it or find a way to do that one thing to it. What do I do to it that really gives me ownership of this, that it originally isn't mine? How can I work within this tradition but also begin to separate myself from it, even though I'm also signaling where I'm coming from? So sometimes I'll do it by making paintings that are direct quotes to something else. And in situations like that, I'm thinking of how color, compositional gestures, compositional structures, the gestures, and things like that can function not just as picture-making tools, but as historical references that I use to create a bond between my own work and the history of painting in this case. So this is where my work begins, and they tend to be about 7 feet by something. So this, I believe, is 7 feet by 9 feet. And I have a few pieces towards the end that help with scale. And the title of this work is The Rest of Her Remains. With some of the works, I might end up talking a lot. With some of them, I might not. Just because I'm slightly getting nervous about time. This is a piece that probably is about the size it's projected. The title is I Refuse to Be Invisible, and it was inspired when I was reading Chinua Achebe's response to Conrad's Heart of Darkness. But a lot of the early works I did revolved around this couple, which is based off of me with my husband. This is a 7 by 7 foot work, and the title is Nyado, the Thing Around Her Neck. And the title comes from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's collection of short stories titled The Thing Around Your Neck. And so something I do with the titles become a space for me to highlight my connection to literature, to highlight the influence literature has had on my practice. And this is one of those things I could really spend a lot of time talking on. I'm thinking of how I can simplify it. But it's similar to the connection I have with fashion, the designer I showed earlier. So just thinking of the writers I gravitate towards, lots of people writing out of various African countries and a lot of writers coming out of different Caribbean countries. So Chinua Achebe is someone I've been reading since I was young, and there have been a lot of incredible writers that have come up in the past decade. So Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is a phenomenal Nigerian writer. Junot Diaz from the Dominican Republic. I won't butcher her name. She's from Zimbabwe, and she wrote Nervous Conditions. But the thing I noticed that kind of ties the people I like is if you think of someone like Achebe, who I've read the most of all these people, Chinua Achebe was first generation English speaking. He really he's of my parents' generation, that first generation that went to the city and learned English and went to school and were really schooled in the way of the British. And the fascinating thing about Chinua Achebe is that he writes in English, but when I read his work, it really really puts me back home. And so it was really fascinating to study him and read him and try to figure out what it was about what he was doing, or what were some of the strategies for what he was doing that I could begin to use in my work. And something Chinua Achebe, the good thing about someone that has worked for so long is that lots of people have studied him and broken down what he's doing and explained it. But Chinua Achebe writes in something that has now been coined and termed Nigerian English. And I think because what he's doing is that when he writes, especially when his characters speak, what he does is that he takes what they'll say in Igbo, my language, and he just translates it directly to English. So even though you can still understand it, if you don't speak my language, I have a different experience with it. So I'll just give a little example. If someone is bugging you, if someone is really irritating you, in my language you'll say ina chomoku. And if you translate it, it means you're looking for my trouble. Which, if you read it, you know what it means, but nobody really speaks like that unless if you're Nigerian, you know exactly what it is. So you really begin to have Achebe speak to a dual audience through how he's using language. And so that's something I was very fascinated by, and I've been trying to do in my work, this idea of how do I talk to a dual audience within one work, and how can I do that? And so those are some of the things I take from literature and I'm interested in doing in my work, but also asking the question of how is someone like Achebe using a language that he inherited, but he's able to use it to talk about a place this language did not come from in a very successful way. And Chinua Achebe has this really beautiful quote. The first person who had the quote is Baldwin, but Chinua Achebe tweaked it a little bit, and what he said was, the English language, when altered, can be made to bear the burden of my African experience. And so that's what I'm really interested in, this like altering of something you've inherited, so it begins to bear the burden of another experience. This is a piece called, how much time do I have? Okay. I'll just go for it. So this is a piece I have called Rebranding My Love. And this is a piece where the title also speaks to a dual audience. So a little bit of a backstory on this, which I wasn't sure if I should mention or not, depending on time. So now I'm going to go into my family history. When I got married, it was a little bit of a hula baloo in the country, because at that point, my mother wasn't the head of the FDA anymore, but she was the Minister of Information, and she was running this huge nationwide campaign called Rebranding Nigeria. And it was this campaign that was meant to, every once in a while, countries go through it, this campaign to show that this is a great country that you should visit and invest in, and our economy is booming and things are great and we're proud and we're coming out, breaking free of the shackles of being colonized. Because the thing with colonization is it really leaves you with an inferiority complex for a long time, and I feel the country just there shedding it in the past decade, like having that feeling of we're worth it and what we have matters and is great and we don't have to be ashamed of our local things. So this campaign was kind of happening in the middle of all that, and my mom is spearheading it, and everybody knows this. And smack dab in the middle of it, I'm getting married to a non-Nigerian and a white man. Two things, which on its own, problematic, but even not problematic in general, but it was a bit, created some anxiety for my family and family friends, and I might talk about that later on. But what made it even a little bit more complicated was because the only other person who had been married in my family at that point, my older sister, had married a non-Nigerian. So there was that feeling of what is wrong with this family, and you're talking about how great the country is, but none of your kids want to marry someone from the country. So it was fascinating, like my wedding became like the thing people are arguing about on blogs, like what does it mean? Why would she do this? So this kind of is playing into all that. So if you know that whole history, then Rebranding My Love has a very different meaning for you. And if you didn't, it doesn't mean you have to know that to get it, then it could just be referencing this branding that is happening with the kiss from the woman to the man. So that addressing a dual audience begins to happen in the work. Same thing with this one, the title kind of addressing a dual audience. The title of this is Efulefu, which translates to the lost one. So if you see it, it could just mean the lost one is the male character, because if you see this work in real life, he's not painted. He's just the wash of the background that I put down on the paper. So he really is lost in terms of how the work exists. But it's also, to someone who speaks my language, I might begin to be the efulefu. Because efulefu is a word that is a little bit difficult to explain. It's something, it's an insult. It's not a good thing. It's something you'll call someone that has lost their way. So it's something you'll use, say, if you had a politician who promised to represent your area, and they were going to build roads and do this and do that, and they got into office and they didn't do anything. You'll say that person is an efulefu, or somebody that has turned their back on their people. And so just thinking of how people maybe thought I was an efulefu by marrying outside my culture, which was interpreted as turning my back on my people, so that will be understood differently based on where you are, or like whether you know the language or not. This is thread, and I'll skip it because I still have 40 slides. Sorry. And it's just, I could spend 5 minutes on each one, so you don't make the cut. Sorry. This is one tinti, which is maybe 6.5 by 8 feet. And, so much to say, so little. Okay, I'll try and kind of hit multiple things. So One Tinti is from an album called Love One Tinti, which is actually the album you see transferred here. I realize I've not even said the basic things about these works. These are made on paper. It's acrylic, but I'll also use pastel, charcoal, colored pencils, and the photographs you see in here, all these little pictures are transferred, which is a printmaking technique. I print each one out individually, I put it face down, and I transfer it with solvent. And there's some collage going on in here. All the little holes have collage in them. But with the work, what I'm doing is, if I'm thinking of this space where disparate things come together, then I want to find a way to make the work that undergirds that content. So if I'm thinking of this idea of a third space, what I've been doing the last few years is making this work that is painting, it's drawing, it's printmaking. There are elements of photography in it, but it isn't quite any one of those things. It's almost like all those different things have come together to yield this new language of image making, which ties into this theme of a space where different cultures overlap to yield a new trans culture. And I try to kind of keep pushing at that or picking at that on different levels. So if I'm thinking of making this work about a space where disparate things come together, when I'm making the work, I'm trying to have disparate things exist together. So having areas where there's a lot of realism and areas where there's abstraction, having areas that are very skillfully, very sensitively painted, with areas that might be more like crudely or loosely painted, going back and forth between language and image, and you'll see it in some other works, and even within the photographs and within the architectural spaces, kind of moving back and forth between the past and the present, kind of going back and forth between inside and outside. So this is an interior space, but then you have this screen wall, which is an exterior element. So there's always that switch up of what's happening. So I begin to create this space that is a little bit unknown or uncertain. Oops. This is, the title of this is "And We Begin to Let Go." But with this also just thinking of this syncretic nature of how my work is put together and having that underscore the cultural amalgamation that really fascinates me. Lots of little things to say about this one, but I'll move on. I would like to get to the newer works. And this is a detail of that. So just to kind of give you an idea of what happens up close, that's the back of the chair where there are these little cutout pieces that are glued in it. You can see the transfers better. Some of the lines are extruded, some are hand painted, some are taped. This is a small piece. It's just about this size, 20 by 24, and it's called Janded. I'll skip it. Janded is a very fascinating slang in Nigeria, and that's one of, I could spend way too much time talking about this. But it's really trying to do a piece, and I mentioned this at the crates today, but sometimes I like to challenge myself in my studio, and with each piece there's a new challenge. So with this piece I wanted to make a work that did not have transfers or was done a totally different way. So it's on panel, it's acrylic and oil, and it's just straight painting. And I wanted to see if I could do something simple that didn't have all that other visual noise, but still touched up on something I was interested in. And it's like there's so many layers to the work. This was fun to do because it helped me isolate just one instead of trying to say multiple things at the same time. So Janded is a Nigerian slang that means it can be a noun or it can be a verb. It can be just the UK or the United States of America. It could also be to travel to those places, can be to jand or you're janded. So I was thinking of creating this character that was at once janded but also very like local bush girl at the same time, which is evident from her tribal marks, which is a tradition that has really died out and you don't see it anymore. My mother had one, but her generation really was the last to do it. And you might see people of my generation who have it, but that's usually a fairly strong indication that they grew up in a super traditional house or that they grew up in the village. So I was thinking of this character that was very cosmopolitan, but not at the same time. This is wedding portraits, and you can see me using that portrait fabric over here. It's glued and I put a wash over it. And this is based off of the traditional marriage ceremony in Nigeria. Oh, there's a particular picture I'm trying to find, but I can't locate it right now. Oh, you can kind of see it over here. There, I don't know if you see it, that's me giving my husband a cup of palm wine. And that really is the moment of marriage and the traditional wedding ceremony. So I did that recreation. This is a picture of my studio in Harlem from 2012, just to give an idea of scale. And that's the piece finished. And the title of this piece is I Always Face You Even When It Seems Otherwise. And this really was really dealing with that anxiety I felt coming from family and friends about my marriage, and this fear that my marriage was going to make me turn my back on my people or abandon my tradition, my culture, the life I used to know. And this piece really talks about that. And sometimes with the transfers do different things from work to work. And the transfers imbue the work with a cultural and historical context. And in this one, the transfers are chronological. So I was thinking of this piece as having a rhythm to it, as starting off very quiet, and then you see that reference to Efulefu, the lost one, or somebody that is Ilefu. There are different variations of it, and you don't quite know to which I'm referring from this. But I wanted this piece that started off really quiet and slowly picked up speed and kind of got faster and faster as it moved to the right and had this crescendo over here. So I was thinking of like a timeline to it. So the transfers in this area were from the year I was making it or a few years before. So they were between 2010 and 2012. The transfers found in this area were from maybe 2000 to 2010. The transfers found in this area were from the 90s into the late 80s. The transfers found in this area were like more old historical pictures. So that's just an example of like how I did the transfers for this work. This is the type. This is 7 Umuezebi Street. So just thinking of a party I would have attended in a friend's house. And something that's beginning to happen, I should have touched upon this before, is I'm really beginning to build a lexicon of things I'm working with. So you see the objects on the table show up every now and then. The window with the plants, and I'll hopefully get a chance to talk about it later. This is Something Split and New, and the title is based on Something Torn and New, which is a book by Ngugi wa Thiong'o that really explores the collateral damage of colonization and how it deals with the erasure of culture and especially language. But, I'll move on. But with this really, I talked earlier on about specificity and how I play with specificity. So just to give an example, so it ties into those pictures at the beginning, this is a character that is wearing this outfit by a very expensive Nigerian designer, Tiffany Amber, but then she has this hairstyle that is very local, not cosmopolitan or not contemporary, this threaded hairstyle and these slippers that you kind of buy at the market, and it's not very expensive. So if someone is able to begin to decode the signifiers, there's that feeling of, I don't quite understand this character, she doesn't really make sense, which is kind of where I want her to reside. This is a detail of that piece. This is titled Tea Time in New Haven, and with this I wanted to make a work that did not have figures in it. I felt maybe I was becoming too reliant on the figures, so I wanted to take the figure away but still have the figure be very much implied. Or maybe even to implicate the viewer into the piece. And at this point, I'm trying to make work that draws the viewer in more so they become a part of the space. So this is based off tea culture in Nigeria. We drink tea and bread most mornings, but of course, what we call tea or what our tea culture has evolved into is very different from what you have at tea time in the UK. So this is also one of those things that we've inherited, but it has slowly become its own thing that is now unique to the continent. Where if someone sees this, they, especially with the title, they understand that it's tea, they see the mug, they see the hot water kettle, but you really become aware of if you're within the space this language is coming from or not. And something that happens in this work, I know I'm talking a lot about the content and Nigeria, but a lot that happens on the surface really is a conversation for other painters that I put on it. And there's a lot happening in terms of how images are made and the different languages of image making and the different languages of painting. So this is something I had fun doing, almost thinking of it as a puzzle or a fun passage for painters who come up close and take time looking at it. So there's this constant shift from one area to the next in terms of the language of how these are painted. And I'll try to point some out. So like the label of the bread is collage, but the collage is only half of it. Half of it is collage and the other half is painted. But to know where that seam happens, you have to be in front of it. This is collage with a wash on it. This is transferred with crayons over it. And like this little box over here, one side is collage, one side is transferred, one side is painted. And you have to be in front and come like this close before it begins to reveal itself. Or like this, the milk tin. This is collage, and then I put the same picture in Photoshop, made it darker, cut that out, and put it over it to get the dark. This is cut out and collaged on it, and I did a wash over that to make it darker. So there was this constant shift of how things were achieved. So I just wanted to point that out because I feel maybe I'm not talking a lot about the painting of it and the painting conversations happening in it. This is a painting by Diego Velázquez of Prince Balthasar Carlos, and I'm only showing it because it influenced this work. This is the work in progress, and I'm putting it up to give an idea of scale. And this is the work finished, and it's titled The Beautiful Ones. And the title comes from a book by Aikwe Ama called The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. So I'll just constantly having this, these paintings where I'm winking at other artists. And that's the same piece. I didn't like the color scheme of that, so I redid it. And it ended up giving birth to a whole series. So this is the #1 of the Beautiful Ones series. This is the Beautiful Ones #2. But with this, I'm thinking of making areas, and not just in this, in a lot of my works, doing areas that are really rendered and voluminous, but then also having areas where space is compressed, and thinking of that, an area like that where I might be engaging in what might be considered a pop vernacular. I might have areas that are rolled, that talking about mechanical production, and those might exist side by side with something that shows the hand. So it's this constant merging of disparate things. This is the Beautiful Ones #3. This is The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born, Might Not Hold True for Much Longer. And this is another one of my lexicons, if I could call it that, is the photograph from my grandmother's table. This is a piece called Predecessors. That's it in progress. It's a diptych, just to give you an idea of scale, and that's it finished. And what's beginning to happen in my practice at this point is that I'm really trying to think of the physical experience engendered when you're standing in front of the work, and really thinking of how your eye wanders from one area to the other. So it's about these layers of paint, layers of print, layers of images, information that really is moving, making jumps across space, across time, across languages of image making, print, painting, drawing, photography, collage. Really jumping from inside, outside. Of course, you're inside again and you have the screen wall from outside, between rough and smooth. If you see this in real life, in some areas, I'll put like crushed up marble in some of the paint, between past and present, between hand and mechanical, and really thinking of something that has a cinematic vision to it. And I think that's why I like to work large. So it's like if you're looking at this piece and you're moving through it, you can go from a head that looks, reminds you of a painter like Kerry James Marshall, or maybe Northern Renaissance painting, and you move a little bit, and I'm doing this flat kind of rolled paint, and you move a little bit, and you're looking at pictures in Nigeria from the early 2000s and you move a little bit and you're looking at pictures of Nigeria from the 80s and you move a little bit and then you're at my grandmother's table from the 70s. So it's this constant shift in where you are, like at each point, where you are or what time you're in the work is shifting. So what I want is to make this work that when you're a viewer and you stand in front of it, and as you're kind of taking this cinematic journey across the piece, your eyes begin to make these jumps and traverse these different worlds and periods and experiences, so that you really do begin to get a sense of this third space. And I'm also beginning to play with perspective, where the point of view changes from one part of the work to the other. You know, once you really begin to if you try and break down this composition, if you really start asking questions like, where is the vanishing point? Where is the horizon line? Things break down, and you can see that I'm really making this space that is nonsensical, even though it looks like it works. And the ground I'm trying to create this tension underfoot, where you feel you're not quite sure of where you are because things are constantly changing. So making this piece that you can stand back from and look at, I want to put the viewer in this third space and not just depict it. This is Sunday Morning, and it's from this same series that really talks about generations. And you see my grandmother's stuff again. This is Mommy, Mama, Mommy, Mama. So Mama is my grandmother, Mommy, my mom, and Mama, which is my little sister. So just talking of the three generations again, and really thinking of the past obtaining a place in the present. And just like a little wink to painters, this background references a Hammershøi painting. Hammershøi is a Danish painter I like a lot, and there are lots of like Hammershøi Easter eggs in my work. That's a detail of the piece. And these are transfers, just transferred piece by piece till you get the big work, instead of doing one. So instead of just transferring one small image, I take one small image and blow it up really large and then transfer it in bits. So the lining up of it takes a long time. That's a detail. This is Twain Shall Meet. The background again is based on a Hammershøi painting. Really thinking of altar pieces for this. So these are two pictures that are transferred together, and it's fine. Maybe I shouldn't give it out, but it's kind of fun. It's the same setup, and I took a photograph of it, and I went to the other side and took a photograph of it from the same eye level. And so I've seamed them together in the transfer. So you're looking at the same piece from the front and the back at the same time. So it's kind of like this two things coexisting that really shouldn't make sense. This is titled, I Still Face You, and I did this piece first, but I ended up wanting it to be more expansive, and it grew into a triptych. So it ended up being three separate pieces that go together. So that was I Still Face You. This is I See You in My Eyes, and so you see me using that commercial customized fabric with the portrait of my mother done to promote her senatorial campaign. And this is the other panel, Bush Girl. And you see the three of them together. And if you remember the picture they showed of me from the very beginning of the lecture, I was standing right here. So like if I was standing, my head would probably reach here. So that gives you an idea of the scale. And so I mentioned some of the lexicons or things I've been working with. The plant has been becoming more and more important. So I did this plant piece, Cassava Garden. I'm also thinking of this no man's land that doesn't exist. I'm doing this overlap of an Indian rubber plant, which is a very popular house plant. I feel like I see it in a lot of LA houses, with the cassava, which is a plant I associate with rural life in eastern Nigeria. So you have this thing that really makes no sense to have a cassava garden. And I'm really trying to depict the realities of my multiple worlds and languages at once. And using portrait fabric again. And this, just a little bit of a fascinating aside, this is my sister wearing the purple version of the portrait fabric that is collaged on the piece. This is called Portals, and I like this piece. I like to talk about it a lot, but I'm getting slightly tired of talking. I didn't think it could happen. Okay, I mean, there are lots of things I could say about this. The background in here is based off an LA landscape. I drove around at night in Highland Park and I took some pictures of houses on the hills. So you can't see it, but if you're in front of it or if you see it up close, it has all these lights, but then I have the cassava in front of it, so it's also like creating this weird nonsensical space. You know, the IKEA furnitures, which I associate with my American apartments, with this TV with Abacha on it, which is definitely Nigeria, 1990s, a fan box, you know, just thinking of something on the wall that speaks. Yeah, I've talked a little bit about specificity, but it's little things like that. The way the light switches are different from country to country. Those are the things I get excited about. How can I put a light switch or a fan box on this wall so you can either feel like, I don't know what that is, or someone goes, I know exactly what that is. I remember having this up in a space, and someone asked me, where is it? Yeah, someone was like, why do you have a sink in the dining room? And then there was someone else who like jumped in and was like, really? That's so normal. So just some things speak to different people. You eat some dishes with your hands, so you have a sink in your dining room. Surprisingly, the person who it was familiar with at this show was from India, but she said they do have sinks in their dining rooms as well. So it's like this constant, each one kind of has signifies a different time, a different place, a different situation. So I'm really beginning to create this no man's land, and also talking about the composition and how things don't really make sense. You know, an easy thing to think about with this piece is if you can imagine this girl standing up, the piece immediately breaks down. You realize that this space makes absolutely no sense. Like this TV will be that size. So that's the thing, there are these spaces that make sense, but the longer you spend with it, the more you begin to feel, you know, is that no longer at ease feeling, things are not quite right, something is off, or there's a weird tension underfoot. This is a piece that I can't say the title. I will spell it. It's Ikeya. And for me, that's just a play on, this is a whole, I just feel like there's so much to say with each word. But this kind of is touching up on this whole debate that was happening between Chinua Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o about African writers, and this debate of should they write in English or should they write in the local languages. And what fascinates me is how even when you write in the local languages, like for me, Igbo is my language. It's a spoken language. It was never written. And starting from like my parents' generation, they've started writing it. But what you're doing is that you're using the alphabet that we know, and you're trying to write this language that didn't really evolve with the alphabet. So, you know, it's like putting a square peg in a round hole kind of thing. Things don't really work. And the language is very tonal. So even if you write it, it still doesn't make sense if you can't hear it. And so the title of this really highlights that for me. So the title is Ikeya. Ya in my language is gender neutral. It can be his or hers or him or she, and IKE based on how you say it, whether it's Ike or Ike, can be buttocks or strength. So this can be his buttocks or it can be her strength. And so kind of saying, see, writing this doesn't really help. This is Super Blue Omo, which is one of the recent works. This is See-Through, and this might be the only one I talk about. I'll just flip through the rest, just because I like this one a lot. But this is See-Through, and I was really having fun with this, like, images within images within images, and I wanted to see how long I could prolong it. So there are lots of fun things happening. Like if I had a detailed shot of this, all the places where you're seeing the portrait fabric through the grid of the table, it's actually cut up and glued on it. And then you have this area where you have the table and the reflection on the table and the marks on the table, and underneath it all are transferred images. So it's just this space of multiple overlaps. And you have the TV with Grace Jones in front of the bars with this house behind. But then you get over here and you have this decorative window bar, and behind it you have the louvers, and then the transferred images are images of people. I don't know how well you can see it here, but the transferred images, so with each piece I set myself like a homework for my images I want to find. So for this one, I wanted to find images of people standing in front of doors or in front of windows, and the walls next to the doors of windows had to be either a minty green or a blue. And that took a long time to find all those. So I actually found one of my sister in front of a window with this minty wall. There's this girl in front of this screen wall with the greenish mint. So it's a lot of like people. There's a guy in front of the doorway. So it's like this other see-through into another space, into another space, into another space. So the grid to the windows to the photos in the back, which open up into another space. This is a diptych called Garden Thriving. This is a screen wall. This is wedding souvenirs. Using my brother's portrait fabric. It is a photograph from my traditional wedding, and these are souvenirs from my wedding. And this is mother and child. That's the Hammershoy painting that influenced this piece, if you remember this. Just like some little things I'll point out from that. So that's the Hammershoy painting that influenced it. Thinking of William Bailey back here, looking at Hammershoy for this space as well. The floor is terrazzo, which we had in my house in the village. I'll stop at that for this. And I have some installation shots so that you get a sense of the size of some of these works I showed recently. And this is from the show I just had in London, which Eric saw. And I think there's just one more slide. Thank you so much for your patience. I really appreciate it. So thank you all so much for staying. It means a lot to me. Questions? No, we don't have time. Oh, okay. I'll be here if you want to ask. Or do I need to be going somewhere? Oh, no, it's fine.
I'm throwing you off, it looks like.
Thank you so much.
Njideka, thank you so much. My name is David Engel, president of Contemporary Forum.
And to Njideka, to Eric, to Dale, to Deb, and to everyone from Phoenix College, thank you so much for sharing your time and your talent with Contemporary Forum and Phoenix Art Museum. I want you guys to know that as a proud community college graduate, I have your back. I have already started the checklist for next year's lecture. So, crazy glue, sparkly shoes, and to get my hair to look as good as Eric's. And a pack and play, okay? Contemporary Forum is celebrating our 35th year this year as a support group of Phoenix Art Museum. And we do dozens and dozens of activities every year. And we are very proud to support the museum. And although we have hundreds of members, we would welcome new members. We have a showcase to tell you more about the museum and more about Contemporary Forum on the evening of Wednesday, May 10th. There's information right outside on a table if you'd like to join us. There will be a tour by Gilbert Vicario, our chief curator, followed by cocktails. So if anyone's interested, please make a reservation and join us on May 10th. Thank you, and good night.